But what I realized is my side hustle started picking up, and you go to college for the potential to increase your opportunities. And I realized that I already had an opportunity in front of me. And so why would I continue to invest more time and money into college on a maybe when there was a definitive yes that was available? So I actually dropped out and never went back. Like spreadsheets and business planning. But when you throw yourself in the fire of entrepreneurship, it doesn't matter what you've planned. Like the majority of that goes right out the window day one when you actually start integrating those things. And so there's a big difference between planning and doing. And I think educational institutions are largely planning and entrepreneurship mentoring is largely doing.
Welcome, millionaires and future millionaires. You're listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast, a show where you'll hear the stories and interviews of everyday millionaires. We'll unveil their decisions, their strategies, and their portfolio allocation. Now to your host, Jace Mattinson.
Welcome back to another episode of the Millionaires Unveiled podcast. This is episode number 348. Stace, how's it going? How are you adjusting to spring forward here?
You know what? Today was a good day. Sunday's a good day for it, I feel like. I'm glad it's not on a Monday. And we got the kids done pretty well, so happy about that.
Yeah, I don't know why, but this morning when we woke up and it was like 7:40, and I'm like, wow, the kids let us sleep in so late.
Which actually meant that they woke up 20 minutes earlier than they were supposed to, because the rule's supposed to be 7 a.m., but that's all right. We all survived it.
Anyway, crazy. Came across another article that was pretty interesting this week. This one on family offices, which, interesting. The amount of family offices since 2019 have tripled. In fact, family offices manage about $6 trillion now. It's about 1.3-ish billion per family office. We got 2,600 billionaires worldwide, and there are roughly 90,000 people worldwide worth over $100 million. That is pretty crazy. In fact, I'm wondering, our podcast, we're like almost 350 episodes. By the time we launch 350, we'll have probably interviewed 3 people, maybe 3, I think, with net worths over 100 million. So we've just barely scratched that surface. But I used to work with some family offices. At the time, was not as big of an industry. It's becoming a massive industry. And I wonder, must be, Wall Street must be licking their chops.
Yeah, the article was interesting, saying that there's been more competition vying for their funds and trying to solicit them. So interesting. And I wonder, I'm thinking, Jace, at what point would you feel like you could actually relinquish control to other people, even if you had 100 million plus, which is about where family offices typically start?
Yeah. I have a lot automated, but I don't know that I could ever, I would always want to have a little finger, but I bet a lot of them do around their investments. Maybe hiring a few people to manage certain aspects, deal flow, do those kinds of things, taxes, legal, etc. But I'd always want to be having a monthly overview, monthly financial on my own personal stuff, which, to each their own. But yeah, $100 million seems like kind of the mark for most family offices to either form or become something. So got a ways to go. We'll see. If you'd like to be on the show, and if you're over 100 million, that'd be interesting. But if you're a millionaire, love to be on the show. Send us email, millionairesunveiled@gmail.com. Always look for new great guests. Got several coming down the pipeline here in the next few weeks. And in fact, we have one of them today, as always. But today we have Damon. He unveils his net worth at 2.5, but it's probably realistically in the low teens range into the low 20s, because he has a business that he just doesn't know what it's valued at. But he does mention later in the interview that it probably could sell for anywhere between $10 and $20 million. So for all intents and purposes, I'm pegging him at 12.5. And I think that's probably realistically the lowest piece or lowest part that his net worth would be. And probably upwards of 20. He runs a very successful marketing business, and really great conversation with him about working in some interesting environments. I'll just leave it at that led to him going and essentially starting his own business in a similar field. But yeah, he worked with a couple different bosses, different entrepreneurs, very contrasting styles. And yeah, we even had a little conversation about what happened to one of them. They got in trouble with the feds. So Yeah, a little highlight there, a little foreshadowing of what's to come. But he has a little bit in real estate, a little bit in some other investments, and then, as I mentioned, majority is likely in his company. He did just recently buy a little sports car too, so we talk about that, and good for him. He's been crushing it, worked really hard for a long time, and sounds like the sports car's been quite fun. So, without any further delay, let's get in the interview with Damon. Damon, do you want to just give us a little about your background or what you're up to now?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to chat. So I ran a marketing agency for 17 years, stayed in my lane, found something I enjoyed, and seen that to some reasonable success, and have had a lot of fun stories along the way, and also been married for 17 years, 3 kids, and so best of both worlds.
Awesome. So I want to get into the marketing thing because it's pretty unique for our show. I don't know, especially being an entrepreneur. Is this something that you started from the ground up then?
Yeah, my background was originally web design, but even how I got into web design is probably a story worth sharing for the entrepreneurial audience. My background started because I started a car enthusiast website. When I was in my early 20s, I enjoyed all the things that most early men in their 20s do, modifying cars, and that community kind of took off. And I got lucky because the early years of that community, coincidentally, a movie came out called Fast and Furious that nobody knew was coming down the pipeline. And so that actually kind of fueled the community and brought more attention to the type of space I was in. And so the way that kind of got me into entrepreneurship is, as the community grew, I started to go, how do I make this community better? And so I got more into design and marketing. And then I was the guy that did it on the side for several years. And I got to a point where my employer got raided and shut down by the FTC and the governing bodies of authority. And I had a choice to make. Was it see if I still had a job, go find a new one, or take the bet on entrepreneurship? And so that's when I took a bet and took a leap of faith and bet on myself. And that's how I started the agency. And 17 years later, here we are.
Holy cow. We're going to get into this because this is going to get exciting. But
there's a lot. Yeah.
Before we do, what's your net worth today?
About $2.5 million.
Nice. And how is that broken up?
About let's see, about 40% in real estate, and then 40% in retirement accounts, and then 40% in whole life insurance, and then the remaining 20-30% in retirement accounts.
Interesting.
Whole life cash value.
Interesting. A couple of different things I want to get into. And then in terms of valuation of your business, just too hard to know, or did you actually have an exit already at this point?
No, I haven't. And that's something we can go deeper on. But the short answer is I could sell. I've never really had an interest. I enjoy what I'm doing. And prior to a couple of years ago, I didn't want to put a number on it because I didn't want to take the lazy route and go, oh, I've hit that number, and then start exploring an exit. And so I actually kind of kicked the can down the road for a while. And then I finally felt comfortable enough asking myself, like, if I was at that number, would I still commit to continuing on the things I wanted to do? And I felt comfortable that I wouldn't take the lazy route. And so I calculated what I would need to make an exit. And then coincidentally, like 9 months later, I hit it. So I could certainly exit for, somewhere probably in the range of 10 to 20 million. But no, I'm still happy what I do. And this year's another record year. And so I don't plan on going anywhere. I think I'll probably just redirect my time in what I do within the company, but I don't plan on selling anytime soon.
Interesting. So, all right, before we get into the details of kind of your asset allocation, real estate, the whole life is pretty interesting. Let's back up here. So you're working a W-2 job and your employer gets shut down. Mm-hmm. Did you know any of that was coming? Was there a lot of shady business that was happening that you were kind of questioning in the first place, or was it just a complete shock the day that happened?
Somewhere in the middle. I knew that the guy was under investigation, but it was not for the current company. So what had happened was this gentleman, let's actually start with the gentleman before him. The gentleman before him was a really successful entrepreneur. He was doing $1 to $2 million a month. I was his only full-time employee. He had a part-time secretary, and financially he was killing it, but he was burning relationships, had real bad reputation for doing shady things, was under constant, legal review from state and federal. And it was just like it was just a toxic place. So eventually I just left that guy purely because of the toxicity. And then I ended up being fortunate enough to build up a reputation for the kind of niche types of designs that I did for that guy. And so when I left, somebody found out pretty quickly and called me up and offered me a job. And so this other gentleman said, hey, I'd like you to work remotely. And he was in another state. And the state he was in, my wife and I were newly married. Kids were going to be on the horizon sometime in the upcoming couple years. And it was a place I just didn't want to raise my kids. And so I told him, I'm all about it, but I don't want to go live there. And he says, well, all right, well, why don't you work from home and we'll revisit this in a year. So in that opportunity, I got to work from home, and that's part of how I started my side hustle as well, is I would work on that early in the morning and then work on the 9 to 5. Well, what had happened is this guy came under investigation because of his previous company they ended up nailing him for wire fraud. Now, that's debatable on what they caught him on, but nonetheless, he got hit with some things in his previous company where he had a civil suit, but he didn't have a criminal suit. And so then the criminal suit caught up. So we knew that he was under criminal investigation for a previous business. He was very transparent about it. He had kind of corrected course on all those things that he learned that he did wrong. And he had a very different business. He was a very pleasant guy. He was very different than the guy before, loved his wife, great reputation, treated his employees well, almost the complete opposite of the other guy. And so what had happened is when the criminal suit caught up to him, it went to, I'm going to say this wrong. It went to one of the federal districts. Like this is where I'm going to say it wrong. I think there's like 6 federal districts in the state, something like that. And so the attorney that was pursuing him had a grudge out for him. And I don't remember the whole story why, because this was a long time ago, but he had taken him to 5 of these federal districts and it had got thrown out. Well, the last district accepted the case. And so the attorney took him to court and they found him guilty on like a random thing that was kind of a stretch. And he got sentenced to several decades in prison. And so the actual case going to court and him being found guilty and for that stretch of time was the surprise part.
Holy cow. So, and at what point, I guess what year were you kind of going through all this range of years were you kind of going through this? Were you W2? Was this right out of high school or post-college?
Mid-20s, yeah.
Okay, so and did you go to college at all?
I did, but I dropped out a semester before I got my bachelor's. My perspective on college is like it has its advantages and disadvantages for certain career opportunities. But what I realized is my side hustle started picking up, and you go to college for the potential to increase your opportunities. And I realized that I already had an opportunity in front of me. And so why would I continue to invest more time and money into college on a maybe when there was a definitive yes that was available? So I actually dropped out and never went back.
Wow. So you drop out, you work in W2. What year? I mean, I guess how old were you when you said, hey, this isn't working, I'm going to go take this leap in entrepreneurship? Late 20s?
It was still, so the introduction into this world with that first guy was like 22 to 24. By the time I got introduced to the second guy, I was like, 24, 25. By the time that guy's business got shut down, I was 26 or 27. And so the opportunities that I had were working on my side hustle, picking up some good income, and then being exposed to the world of entrepreneurship with the first guy. And then when the second guy got shut down and I had an opportunity or I had a decision to make, it was, some of the people in the company were like, oh, you're fine. Everybody else is fine. Because they had this company structured in a way where they kind of split it out into separate entities that supported each other. So if one went down, then the others could still operate the general operations. And so in theory, there was still a job. The second option was, do I really have a job? How viable is that first option? And so do I go look for a 9 to 5? And I figured if I wasn't, I figured my chances were pretty low on the first one, even though people told me otherwise. And to this day, I've never heard from anybody at that company. So I was told my paycheck would come that Friday. I still had a job and I never heard from anything. And I never got the last paycheck for the hours I had worked. And so when I had that choice and I knew that it probably wasn't option number one, and I had built up enough income on the side, which wasn't a lot. Like we're talking, I was probably making like $28,000 a year from the day job and $25,000 a year on the side. So I was making like 50 grand. And so it wasn't a ton, but I did the math and I realized it's probably as calculated as a risk as I would have as an opportunity. My wife had a job. We didn't have any kids yet. And so we had a little more flexibility on the risk tolerance. We had a pretty cheap mortgage relative to now, I guess you'd say. And then a car payment, and that was it. And so it seemed like if I cut my income in half, but freed up I don't know, 80% of my time, and maybe we lose the disposable income, but we can still pay all our bills. That seemed like a great opportunity.
So, I mean, I appreciate you walking us through that. I'm just thinking through, kind of your mindset around that. I mean, did you have any exposure to entrepreneurship or any of the things in the fields that you were doing, pre-high school or anything?
No, so my safety net in my mind, well, not even my safety net, but my justification for pursuing it was, the only exposure I really had to direct entrepreneurship was the guys that I had started to work with, and then also the people that were around them. So I got introduced to a lot of other successful people. So the veil was lifted where I could see the depth of, the quantity of other people that were successful in entrepreneurship. Now, on my personal side, I never knew what I wanted to be. Like, had you told me that I'd end up running a marketing agency when I was a teenager, I would have been like, okay, I guess. But even then, like, I had little to no exposure. But what I always had was a level of confidence where it's like, you know what, I don't know what it is, but I'm confident that it'll be something. So I always felt the draw to do my own thing. And then, before we hit record, we briefly talked about a little bit of my background. And it's like, I largely learned, I've never had like a mentor where I learned a lot from, but where I did learn a lot from was everybody else screwing up. And both in the business world and in my personal family life, where it's like, don't do those things. And so that was also a draw towards entrepreneurship, where it's like, okay, well, if I want to break these generational chains in my family, then part of the missing component that they have is financial stability. Okay, so then that means I need financial stability. So there was kind of an outline of puzzle pieces like that where I knew what I was looking for if I could just go find that piece. And so I always had an interest to the world of entrepreneurship. I just, in the beginning, I wouldn't have been able to tell you in what industry it was.
The route you took with somewhat going to college, dropping out, but going and working for people that are entrepreneurs or successful, is that a route that you think is a good alternative or maybe even a viable option for people nowadays, given the way that education and learning has changed in our country?
For sure. Yeah. I think that both of my own experience and now as an employer to dozens of people, you learn so much more by doing, and especially in the space of marketing, because, and this is even like, I've served on boards of advisories for educational institutions. And so even me playing both sides of the coin, I would still actively tell these educational institutions, like, you need to compress time on how people learn things, because what works now in the field of marketing can dramatically change in 6 months. Think about like AI and ChatGPT just in the last year, like that just completely disrupted tons of markets literally overnight. And so when you come back to your question about, can you learn a similar amount, if not more, through exposure with entrepreneurship? Absolutely. Because you're learning in real time and you're learning in real engagements. You're learning real things in customer engagement, in sales expectations, and deliverables. And so you can go to all these business schools and learn about business criteria, but what you learn is like spreadsheets and business planning. But when you throw yourself in the fire of entrepreneurship, it doesn't matter what you've planned. Like the majority of that goes right out the window day one when you actually start integrating those things. And so there's a big difference between planning and doing. And I think educational institutions are largely planning and entrepreneurship mentoring is largely doing.
How would you treat somebody in your own organization if they came and said, hey, look, Damon, I want to have my own business one day. I want to learn from you. I mean, are you open to that kind of thing as a successful one yourself at this point?
Mm-hmm. I've actively encouraged them to find something that they're passionate about. And one of my editors now, he's been traveling overseas to go, he found what he's passionate about, and I've been supporting him. And so he went from full-time down to part-time with us. And I told him, one day you will outgrow the value that I can pay you for the responsibilities that you fulfill. And I encourage you to do so. I think most people, or not most people, but I think a lot of entrepreneurs that are fortunate enough to find success realize what really matters. And so, you need your base financial needs met. But at some point, if you continue moving up the ladder of success, the next dollar matters less and less. Some people have said it's once you hit $250,000 a year. Other people have said it's $500,000 a year. But I would generally agree that somewhere in that range, once you get all your base needs met and you have consistent reasonable disposable income, then the less dollar matter, the next dollar matters less and less. And then you start to shift your perspective to impact, how can I contribute in other ways? And so I've been always, I've been fortunate enough to grow internally my teams that way and have a loyal team. And, I didn't lose my first team member until like 14 years in. I had let people go, but I had never had anybody quit. And so I've had really long retention with team members. And I think part of that's built through the culture of supporting the team. And so, depending on your perspective of this question, I haven't necessarily encouraged others to leave for selfish reasons. I do it because I want other people to live happy lives too. But even if you were selfish as a business owner, there are incentives to encouraging other people to find the things that make them happy, whether it's even just moving them across departments. Like when we bring on team members, we ask them, A, what are you good at? B, what do you like to do? And we will hire them on what they like to do. And they could suck at that. But over time, they're going to be more passionate and more effective at the thing that they're passionate about. So you could even be selfish about it and leverage people based on their pursuits, because it will make them more productive if they find the things that they're more passionate about, even if it's on the side and after hours.
Wow, that's pretty wild coming from a CEO of a very successful marketing agency. In fact, I'm sure we could probably have a whole separate episode on culture and how to build them. 14 years, that's pretty remarkable, man. I don't know that I've ever heard that before, where nobody leaves, a decade plus in at a company like that. It's quite the track record. Kudos to you on that for sure.
No, thanks. Yeah. And even then, I think it's, I think we're only at 2 that have left since then. So in the last couple of years, 2 total, maybe 3.
Wow. So let's reverse here just a little bit. I want to go back to the real estate and your asset allocation real fast. Is that, do you have investments that you typically, buy as single family homes or multifamily, or is that just primary residence? And that's kind of how you track it.
It's primary and vacation properties. So I've had investment residential properties, and I've had one commercial investment property. I ended up selling the residential property because we had tenant damage, and the amount of time it took to repair that was such a time suck. Even though it was covered under insurance, the amount of lost time I had to spend on that just made me want nothing to do with that property. Now, had you asked me the year before, I thought we would have kept that property forever. But we ended up getting really lucky also at the time we sold. Bought the property. It was me and my wife's first house. And so we bought it for $159 around 2006. And then we sold it, in about 2021, we refinanced it when all the rates were super low, and I pulled the equity out, and then we used that equity to pay off our lakefront property. And then a year later, so the reason why I tell you the time frame on the equity pull is because when you refinance, you get an appraisal, and so it went from 159 to 265 over the course of a decade and a half. Now, what's interesting is 1 year later, it went from 265, and we sold it at 420 in 1 year.
Holy cow.
And then that was the peak of the market, and now it's come down. So though I still would have liked to have an investment property, I don't regret selling it because we were able to pay off the lakefront property, sell it at a peak, get out of a thing that was stressing me out. So we have, so now I only have 3 properties. We have our primary residence, and, that one is just shy of $1 million now. And then we have 2 lakefront properties. Well, they're side by side, so we use them as a single property, but we bought them at 2 different times. The first one we bought around 150, and now it's worth about 300. Just the raw lot. We have a small cabin on it, so I don't know how much it's worth, with the cabin on it now. But then we bought the other lot next to it because we found out that it was an older lady that owned it, and I went up there one time in the winter, which was weird. I can't remember why, because I never go up there in the winter because it's like up in the mountains and it's cold. And I saw that there was property markers on it, and so I knew that implied they were getting it appraised or sold. And so I messaged the guy and I said, "Hey, are you guys selling your property?" And this guy was in his 60s, and he said, "Yeah, my mom passed away, and so I'm the trustee, and we're going to sell it." I said, "If if you do sell it, could I get the first right of refusal at it? And so we got the opportunity to buy this second property, and then we tore that down too. Now I give you some of that context because the valuations on both of these are based on the raw lots. So the one is worth about 300, and the second one's slightly bigger. It's probably worth 354. But then we're building on it next year. And so now that we have the side by side, part of the reason why I said we have a small cabin on the one side is because the property setbacks wouldn't allow us to build anything of reasonable size. But now that we own the two sides, we can remove that center easement, and now we can build a full-size cabin. So once we actually build on it, then it'll probably double the value of the lots.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. And you don't put those on Airbnb? That's just personal use?
I will. Not currently, though. No,
Okay.
Because the current one's so small, it's,
Not worth it.
It's, yeah.
Okay, cool. And I guess from a and this is kind of teeing up my next question, but in terms of like just a mindset, around real estate, you mentioned that you paid cash for these. I mean, why pay cash? Was it just because of the raw dirt or small cabin that you felt like it was probably hard to get a loan on in the first place? Or is there more of a risk standpoint from your mindset that you just don't want to have debt on real estate?
No, it wasn't about concern about debt on real estate. Like, I understand there's value in good debt, and I think real estate is one of those good debt options. So I didn't, on the first one, we were able to buy it seller financed. They didn't. What was funny is we had been looking around this lake for a while, a couple of years, and I just wanted to buy something cheap. And so we were looking at things around 30, 40 grand, but then I couldn't find anything that I cared for. And so when we kind of ran out of properties to look at, then I kept seeing the one we eventually bought in the listings and magazines. And finally I was like, well, I don't want to pay that much, but let's go look at it because it's all that's left. And then when we rolled up, I was like, oh, this place is amazing. So what I found out later was, part of the reason why it was for sale for so long is because of those property setbacks. I don't think anybody else wanted to buy it because they couldn't build a large lakefront cabin. And so we were able to buy that seller financed, which was awesome because then I don't have to go take out a loan. I don't have any debt on my credit. And so that left more credit available. And then when we bought the second one, we pulled cash out of the whole life policy. And so that for similar reasons, there's no debt on your credit, so it keeps your credit more flexible. So I'm not opposed. No, I mean, when we had the commercial property, I had a loan on that, traditional loan. And then when we had the other residential one, before we refinanced it and eventually sold it, we had a regular mortgage on that too.
Interesting. Okay, I want to get into the whole life policy. That's pretty unique. But before we do, just from a standpoint of running your business, how do you think about pulling chips off the table, taking cash home versus, and maybe making some of these other investments, whether it's in real estate or your whole life policy, or reinvesting back in your business for growth?
It's evolved over the years. It's I've never had a direct intention in selling the business because it's been a very comfortable business. I've been always able to live comfortably. And then as it continues to grow, now I've considered that more. And then now I've realized that I never wanted to grow at the expense of my sanity. And so I never fueled a lot into it for it to grow faster than I could manage comfortably. So I certainly could have grown this faster, but I intentionally didn't. And now I feel like there's no more hurdles in the way or hesitations or reasons to justify not accelerating this. And so this is only something that I've recently kind of revisited and gone, okay, what are the options? How can we be more aggressive? So now I'm being more aggressive with it, but I've always lived comfortably off the business, and our profit margins are substantial. And of course, me as the only owner, I get the majority of that. But I did hire a COO about 2 years ago. I did make an arrangement with him where he's vested in an exit at some point. And so we haven't put a timeline on an exit, but it will probably happen at some point. So these are all new things for me, probably in the last 2 years.
Interesting. On that particular, was there something size-wise with your business, or was it, a mastermind or talking to a friend or whatever that kind of prompted putting some of those pieces in place to grow and scale and doing that kind of thing? Not
specifically. It's probably just kind of the natural evolution of things of you grow professionally and you grow personally. I'm also big into family, and I spend a lot of time with my kids, and I always prioritize my availability around them. Like, I've never missed any of my kids' sports games, never missed dance, karate, any of that stuff. But it doesn't mean that I can't spend more time with them. And so I think that was part of the equation where it's like, if I did exit, then I could effectively, in my kids' views, dad didn't work, And so I think where I'm kind of meeting in the middle is I'm kind of rearranging and prioritizing things based on personal health. And, there's generally something at cost with success. Some people it's relationships in their marriage. Some people it's health. And, I think for me, I've lost a little touch with what I'm interested in personally in life outside of work. Like if you were to say, what do you like outside of entrepreneurship and your wife and kids? I don't know. We travel a lot, but that's more on the family side. And so I think I've started to reevaluate, giving myself more attention and finding out what I like in life, just me outside of entrepreneurship and a dad and husband. And then tying that, kind of tying all that all together. I think where I'm currently standing is I think I want to restructure my availability to only work while my kids are in school. So I'll start after they leave and I'll get off 30 minutes before they get home. And so from their perspective, dad's always available.
Interesting. The whole life policy, talk to us how that came about and how's your mind, kind of around that from a investment standpoint and what you utilize it for.
I was exposed to whole life when my first kid was born, and I wasn't super aggressive about it. I bought into it because it sounded reasonable. It sounded safe. It sounded like it had, a good return, which is different than, term policies. And what I've learned over the years when you talk about whole life is people either love it, or they hate it. Like there's very little in between. But it seems like the majority of the people that hate it either don't fully understand it, or understandably they don't have the higher cost to put into it. There's not as much of the cash flow to put into it, which is understandable. But if you have the flexibility and the patience and can afford the higher premiums, it's pretty much a no-lose financial investment that also has multi-purpose benefits. So one is it has obviously the death benefit, but the way that I look at it now that I've got more familiar with it and I've opened up more policies over the years is I look at it as a retirement account. So, we talked about, do you sell the business? And then there's like, do you have 401ks and all these other things? If you buy a whole life policy at a decent time in your life at a decent rate, you basically just have to not die and you have a guaranteed retirement because it always has a compounding return on it. So I've looked at it more like another arm of retirement. So ideally I don't die before 65. And then when I'm 65, all these other things I have going on are hopefully continue to be successful. And then because I'm not dead and my kids have now all gone on to do their own things, then it's just this whole extra pile of cash that I can use for retirement. So there's the death benefit, there's the cash value. After you have it long enough, the cash value compounds enough that it can pay for its own premium. So then it effectively becomes free. And then you also have the availability of withdrawing the cash value. So we talked about how I use that for the second lake property. And so it gives you some people call it infinite banking. I haven't gone deep down that rabbit hole of all that entails, but the short definition of infinite banking is now you have your own resources to be your own banker because you can always tap your own cash reserves. And then when you pull the cash reserves, even though the money is out of your account, you still earn the interest on it. So even though you pay interest on it like a loan, you also earn interest on it like it was never gone. So there's all these multiple benefits to whole life. So when I originally got into it, I didn't know all this, but as I learned more and more over the years, I've become a bigger fan of it and opened up more policies.
Interesting. So talk to us a little bit about rediscovering you and what Damon likes to do. I mean, what are there certain activities now all of a sudden? I mean, what prompted you to kind of go through that a little bit, as you've built up this great business and had a lot of things that you've wanted to accomplish in life? I mean, some people might call it a midlife crisis, but I feel like this is a common topic, at least in my world, that I talk to several people about, whether they're high performers in, regular jobs or whether they're running big businesses or whatever. It seems like this is a big topic of discussion nowadays, just in general.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I can give you my personal story, but in general, it's probably an increasing topic because I think there's more resources for people to talk about it. And I think before, whether it's, I wouldn't say in my case it's a midlife crisis. I'll go into more details on my situation, but for the people that it is a midlife crisis, before they didn't have as many options to talk about it, and so now that there's more openness to this dialogue. And more resources, I could see that becoming an increasing topic because, with entrepreneurship or success, like you usually find success because, you put in more time on something or you're more committed or dedicated to something. And, when you put in more somewhere, it's usually at the expense of reducing somewhere else. And so, for some people that's, it's their own well-being, it's their health, it's their relationships, it's whatever. And at some point that becomes unsustainable to keep depleting that other resource to fuel the other one. So for me, it started to be health things. I got an autoimmune condition a couple of years ago that was pretty significant, that completely changed my daily schedule and, the things that I can eat and my routines. And so that's when I started to kind of think about it. And then I would do mornings. Like I would get up at 5 a.m. I'm not a morning person, but I liked getting a head start on the day and, working for 2 or 3 hours before the rest of the world woke up. And then if I did that, it would set a pace of productivity for the rest of the day. Or if I woke up later around 7 or 8, I feel like I missed 2 or 3 hours of opportunity, and then it would set a negative pace for the day. But at some point, those things started to become unsustainable. And so right now, like the best way I could say is like I'm A/B testing myself. It's like, what do I like and what do I don't like? For the last 4 days, I haven't set an alarm. I haven't done that in over a decade. Like I was always waking up and like sleeping in for me was 7 o'clock. And so I don't know what my routine is going to be. I don't know if it's probably leaning away from a morning person. And then I randomly got an update, on my Oura Ring the other day that talked about my chronotype. And I'm like, I never took a chronotype test. What is it talking about? And then I went in and it's like, based on your markers of this and this, you should go to bed at 11:44 p.m. and wake up at 7:44 a.m. And I'm like, what the? That's the total opposite. But over the years, it's crossed my mind because I certainly know I'm not a morning person, but I've done it for so long that I embraced the productivity of it, even though I didn't like the concept of waking up in the morning. So by default, the opposite of that is a nighttime person. So I've always wondered, like, am I a nighttime person? I don't know. And then my older kid, he's a night owl, totally night owl. My other 2 kids, they go to bed super early. I'm like, maybe I could hang out with my older son at night, And so it's just like, it's a whole bunch of random little things that, I don't know what the right answer is, but these other things are going, it's not us. Like, you need to knock this off.
Spoken like a true marketing guy, man. I love it. A/B testing yourself. That's awesome. What would you say from your company standpoint? I mean, what do y'all do better than, any other agency out there, better than your competitors, for example?
Data. And 2 things. One is data analysis. So we go heavy into buying intent. So like a lot of marketing companies, whether they're good or not, they kind of just shotgun things. And sometimes they get lucky and identify things that work, but they're not intentional about it. They just kind of like, oh, that kind of works most of the time, so I guess we'll do that thing. And so we've done really good about SOPs. And what's important about your standard operating procedure, you probably talked about this 100 times. Other people probably heard it 100 times. But what's interesting is like, as an entrepreneur, even though you hear and that documented processes are important, until you actually do it and see the benefits that come from it, you don't realize how tangibly beneficial SOPs are. Like your team is going to be as good or as bad as your documented processes. Your quality control at scale is going to be as good or as bad as your documented processes. So I've become obsessed with documentation. And now at this size of operation, now I've become obsessed with trying to make my team obsessed with documentation because I can't do all the things anymore and I don't see all the stuff anymore. And so while we have great leads over the departments, now I need them to understand the value of the things that have got us this far so they can repeat it on the more granular level. So SOPs and then the data analysis that we've documented within those SOPs to really align our campaigns with buyer intent instead of just making crap up like a lot of marketing companies do.
Interesting. Awesome. Well, let's wrap up with some rapid fire questions. What's the most expensive pair of shoes that you purchased?
That's funny because I've never bought a lot into shoes until actually this year. And they're still not super expensive. $300. Like before I was like, 50 to $90 is cool with me. So $300. I spent $400 on my kids' shoes. So
what kind for the 300?
Nike, some sort of Nike high top.
Nice.
I don't remember the exact one.
What about the most expensive meal out that you paid for? Yeah.
Most expensive meal out. I'm going to say it was at a steakhouse that was on a private vineyard, and I'm not going to remember the exact price tag. But I took a client and his wife out there. It was probably like $1,000.
What about the most expensive car that you purchased?
That's also funny because I have never bought myself a nice car until this year. I just bought an Audi R8. So $100,000 car.
Look at this guy, man. He was delaying the gratification until this year. I love it.
I was. Well, for me, it was always, I always distilled it down to two words. It was memories and legacy. So I was always like, buying the lake house for memories and legacy, doing the trips for memories and legacy. But yeah, this year it's on the A/B testing. It's like I got to give myself some love.
That memory and legacy of driving that R8, I guarantee your kids will remember. Trust me. You may not think it.
I told you, man. Way more than I did.
Told you. I was one of those kids at one point. I was like, oh man, Dad finally got a new car. Like, dang,
You know, it's funny. I'll tell you two quick stories about that car. Is my middle-aged kid, my younger son, he'll ask me, he'll be like, "Hey, Dad, can you take me to so-and-so's house?" And I'm like, 5 houses away? Yeah. I'm like, oh, okay. But then what the coolest thing about this is the conversations that it invites. And I'm sure this happens with other nice cars, but I think there's something special about the R8 because I think with certain cars, like some people, they either love or hate it, or like, you're a rich douchebag and you get hate. And I have gotten nothing but absolute love with that car. People will go out of their way to like wave or thumbs up on the freeway. People will come up to me at events. Like just 2 nights ago, I was at a thing and somebody who I had no idea who they were came up and said, "Is that your R8 outside?" And so it invites all these really cool conversations. I'll throw people the keys and just the face, they just die inside. They're like, no way. And so it's been really a pleasant surprise. The conversations that car.
That's awesome. What's the key lesson you learned from childhood?
That's for sure a whole other podcast. For me, it was, I super briefly touched on it earlier, where it's like, I learned from other people's mistakes. I grew up in a semi-violent household. And so it's like, okay, don't do those as far as the relationship. Don't repeat that. We talked about how that's kind of where I got the seed planted for the importance of financial stability. But that was the same thing. Financial stability is needed because I don't want to repeat that other thing. So, I don't, despite all the negative things that happened, in a weird way, I have an equal amount of gratitude, not for the circumstances, but for my ability to see that early on and turn all of those moments, even in the moments when they're happening in real time, into learning lessons and going, okay, what am I learning from this and how do I not repeat this?
Nice. Is there an experience or bucket list adventure that you're looking forward to that you haven't done yet?
Maybe next year. Yeah. In the back of my mind, I've always thought, check the kids out of school for an extended period of time and go road trip and travel and things like that. It's been hard getting the kids to buy in, but I think I've got them. They're certainly not bought in, but I think they've maybe'd it enough that I can just be like, oh, I thought it was close enough. And surprise, you're checked
out for a little while.
What's funny is my wife was telling me, we were driving home from dropping him off at school, and she says, yeah, he was talking to the dentist and said, do you got any big plans? And he says, well, maybe next year my dad's been talking about us like traveling and he'd check us out and hire a private teacher. And I look at my wife and I'm like, oh, so he thinks it's cool now and he can brag about it.
That's funny. Telling that at the dentist though. That's great. Yeah. What's the craziest thing you've ever done to earn money?
That's a good one. I don't know. Actually, I'll give you an answer. How I got my first marketing client. I had a design client that said, what do you know about this form of marketing? And I said, I know enough I can probably help you, but I don't know enough that I feel comfortable charging you, but I also don't want to work for free. So I have a proposal for you. How about I work for free if we agree on these benchmarks? And if we hit it, then you owe me retroactively and we start a retainer. and they were all up for it because they had nothing to lose. If anything, they get free work. If everything goes right, then they make a bunch of money. It worked. And so I took that to another client, offered them the same deal. It worked. And that was actually the birth of my agency.
Dang, that's pretty cool.
That's how I started.
That's great.
Yeah.
What's the most fun that you've had with money?
The thing that comes to mind is probably something that's been more recent. The memories and legacy thing is probably what I'm most proud about, is establishing that legacy of comfort for my family, and also them having a healthy respect for, not being spoiled, and understanding that this was something that's been earned, and having a good relationship with the concept of money. But probably the funnest is we bought a membership at this fancy place in Mexico, and somebody made sure to correct me because I said 5-star, and they said, no, it's 5 diamond. So apparently there's a big difference between 5-star and 5 diamond. And this resort has been awesome. We go down there 3-4 times a year. I just went down there with my wife. It was our first trip we've taken without our kids. Their kids have been to the place, but we went again with just me and her. And, part of the self-discovery thing, the last day was probably the nicest. The place was amazing. We had been there multiple times, but we bought there. This time we upgraded to the private suites, which were just like next level. There was an aquarium in the wall with jellyfish in it. And we had 3 decks that all walked out to a private deck pool. But the 4th day is when I realized how much I was enjoying it. It takes me a couple of days to kind of unwind. And we were at this huge outdoor spa. You're right next to the ocean. There's like fish swimming in the little canal that comes up the riverway. And just sitting there and just finally chilling enough where, as an entrepreneur, when you're not working, like your brain is still there most of the time. And so I actually got to a point where I calmed down, and that was probably the funnest thing of recent.
I need to go to that place myself.
Yeah.
That is very hard. As you know, that is very hard to do, to turn it all off completely. What was your first job?
Yeah. I was a janitor at a junior high. That job was awesome. I was 16. Minimum wage at the time was $5.15. I got paid $6.75, so I was balling. And I got it was Monday through Friday, 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. So I had all weekends off, and I had all nights off, and all paid holidays because it was a school, so it was a government job. It was awesome.
What's a closely held belief that you once had that you recently changed?
I haven't deviated my beliefs a lot. One that's, I think, is opening up into interpretation is more on the spirituality side. I'm not a religious person. I've always had an openness to spirituality, though, but not organized religion. And the more I've kind of gone down these self-exploratory journeys, the more I'm exploring that, what is all this about?
Interesting. What would you've dropped a lot of bombs, so if you've got no more, that's all good. But I'm just curious, your last piece of advice for somebody who's just getting started out on their journey.
I like to, there's one there, I kind of have a go-to that's really simple. I think entrepreneurs overcomplicate things, and especially earlier stage entrepreneurs, they overthink things. Kind of like we talked about learning in college versus mentorships. Similar concept. I would say 2 things. One is start, and then 2 is once you start, don't stop. I mean, most of the success stories, especially with social media, you see the highlight reel. You probably had other people mention the quote along the lines of, overnight success takes 10 years. And so usually what you see is like the 11th year. And so you have to pick something that you're willing to spend enough time on. Like, success is not hard. It really isn't that hard. It's really just if you can stick to something long enough.
That's awesome. Appreciate you sharing that. Awesome. That's Damon, net worth of $2+ million. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Yeah, been awesome, Jace. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast with Jace Mattinson. For more stories, investment opportunities, and information, check out our website, millionairesunveiled.com. See you next time when you'll hear from another everyday millionaire.